Hello everyone and welcome to Module 7 Video 2. So in the last video we were talking about the different gods. We covered Odin, we covered Thor, and we covered Frigg. Okay, so now we're going to go on and talk about the other gods. All right. Okay, so the first one here is Tu or Tyr. Now, his name actually means God, okay? That's what Tyr means. And in Anglo-Saxon, the word Tyr with an I means glory, okay? So it's associated with, his name is with God and with glory. He is the father of Frigg, according to some versions, okay? So the Icelandic rune poem from 1550, he calls Tyr the father of Frigg. Lokasenna calls Frigg Figurn's maid, which can also mean daughter. So it may not be Tyr, or Figurn and Tyr may be the same person. He's also called Baldur's brother or son of Odin in some sources, but in other sources, such as Heimskringla, he's called the son of the Jotun Hymir. Okay, so the sources do not agree with each other on his lineage. Okay, he is the god associated with Tuesday. So Tu and Tuesday is Tuesday, and that's his special day. He is very much seen as the community protector. Okay, so there's a myth in the lore where Fenrir, the wolf who wants to destroy everything, basically, needs to be convinced to be tied up. And wouldn't accept it unless Tu put his arm into Fenrir's mouth so that Fenrir essentially could bite his arm off if they didn't let Fenrir go. So then Fenrir submits himself to being tied up. Obviously, they won't release him, and so he bites Tu's arm, and that's why he's now called like the one-handed or something like that. He's very much therefore a god of courage. He's a god of self-sacrifice, a god who puts the community first. He helps to protect the universe and mankind and everyone else and the gods from Fenrir. He protects the community by being willing to put his arm in and lose his arm for that. He's recorded in myth, and also on a picture stone in Gotland and on the Swedish brackets. So this myth of the Fenrir story, it's all recorded several times. Finding Fenrir basically ensures that cosmic order is maintained. Okay, so he's protecting the community, he's protecting the cosmic order, okay, by doing this. So that's part of his role. Just like Thunor, and just like Woden, he is a sky god. Okay, his name is cognate with Zeus or Jupiter. So maybe once he was the supreme sky father for the Germanic peoples. Okay, but by the time records are written down, he's lost that place to both Thor and Odin. Okay, although it's important to note that in Denmark, place names suggest that he was the supreme god there. Okay, so he was most important in Denmark if we look at the place name evidence. And his name comes from Deus, okay, which is the Indo-European sky god and also the chief of their pantheon. So he's very much associated with the very top leadership. World tree pillars are raised to him. In fact, Widerkund says that the Saxons raised one to Mars, and Mars is associated with Tu or Tyr. It's the Romanization of Tu or Tyr. In the Icelandic rune poem, he's called the ruler of temples. And there's even, as we said, a rune for him, which is the Tyr rune or the Tu rune. The Old English rune poem himself says Tyr, glory, is a certain sign, as in a star or constellation. It well keeps faith with the noble ones. It is always on course. Over night's mist, it never fails. So that gives you some idea of how Tu or Tyr is seen. Keeping faith, always on course, never fails. Okay, so it's a sign, it's a thing you can go towards. It says glory, but in Norwegian and Icelandic rune poems, it's actually called Tyr with the TYR, Okay, the actual god itself. So there's some. It's like the Woden Odin with mouth, the Oz rune. Okay, so here we see again a god is being referred to, and we can see from when we compare it to the Norwegian and Icelandic rune poem that actually we're talking about Tyr. It seems to be talking about the northern star. That's what the certain sign, the star constellation being mentioned in this rune poem is. Okay, he's the North Star. He's the one that's good for navigation. He's the one that the wall pillar goes through and revolves around. He's the center point, the guidance, the victory, the order, the one who represents order and protecting that order. And Jakob Altartushi, who visits Denmark, says that the people there worshipped the North Star. Okay, so if Tue or Tyr is associated with the North Star, they're essentially worshipping Tue or Tyr. Okay, and they probably have some sort of rituals to the North Star and to Tue as their representative, of that North Star. He is also seen as a wise divine judge. Okay, he's called the god of the thing. So in Hadrian's Wall, there's a inscription to Mars Thinxus, Mars of the thing, or Mars is, as we said, Tue or Tyr. Thinxus, the thing, the parliament, the community assembly. Okay, it's the legal assembly of the community which creates laws and settles disputes. So he's sort of the god over that. An alternate name for Tuesday was Dingastag, Thing Day. Okay, so again, associating him with the thing, the legal assembly. Tacitus, he mentions priests carried out the punishments based on the inspiration of the god whom they supposed to accompany them on the campaign, and the cases were tried in an assembly. So here we've got priests being the rulers, the judges, using the inspiration of this essentially war god, who Tyr is also associated with. Okay, and this god who tries them in assembly, and people come to this assembly as thing fully armed. Okay, so again associating with him as a god of war. Tacitus also says people can't be punished except by the priests in obedience to the god which they believe to preside over battle. So again, associated this battle god, this war god, with the punishment in the community. Okay, keeping order in the community. In Gylfaginning, it says, he is so wise that it is said that a wise man is Tyr-wise. Now, we said that Woden or Odin is associated with wisdom and being wise, but here we see so is Tue or Tyr. But in Lokasenna, Loki says that Tyr could never settle a case between two people. Okay, so this is in a conflict, and it also conflicts with what else we see in the lore, that he's not able to do these things. But I think Loki's just being Loki in this case. Okay, he very much is more of the wise divine judge. Tyr is, as we said, he's a god of war, a warrior. Okay, so he's equated with Mars by the Romans, and Mars is the Roman god of war. Snorri tells us that men pray to him for victory, and Sigdrifamal mentions carving victory runes for victory on a sword, and calling on Tyr 3 times. So if you want victory in something, he's one to call on, whether that's in legal disputes or in war or in battles of some kind. His name and rune often appears on weapons, okay, in archaeology. And in Gylfaginning, Odin calls him the boldest and most courageous, and he has much power over victory in battle. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean he's the only god of war. As we've seen, Odin is a god of war. Thor is a god of war. They're all, and we'll see next, Freyr and they're all associated with war, basically. But in particular, he is when the Romans' view of him and Odin's view of him. Okay. Now, he may also be the same as the Saxon god Saxnot or Segsnot, whose name means sword companion. Okay, and this was like the supreme ancestor god of the Saxons. okay, where they get their name from and everything. And part of that, we talked about the baptismal vow, where you call on, or you give up the devils of Thor, Woden, and Sexnat. Okay, so Tuin or Tyr may be the same being there, just under a different name. But there's not actually that much in the source text or the linguistics to suggest that his association is with war. He seems more of this self-sacrificial warrior who puts the community first. That's where he seems to be more of the warrior, okay, rather than being a god of war or the god of war. Because, like I said, all of the gods really are associated with war in some kind of way. Battle was also often seen as a way of divining the god's will to settle matters. So this is coming back to the divine judge idea of people using battles or duels between people to work out what is whoever wins, basically. That shows that the god has judged on their behalf to be correct. And there's an Old Norse heading for battle, which is judgment by weapons, vapndorma. Okay, so he is very much associated with war, but also with the self-sacrificial, the community first, the divine judgment, that type of thing, and victory. Okay, so that's two. Okay, now let's talk about Freyr, or Lord Ing, or Lord Ingwe, or something like that. Okay, he's called Ing in a lot more of the Anglo-Saxon. He's called Freyr in the sort of Scandinavian side of things. Now, we don't know what his name actually means. There are a couple of possible options here. So it could mean, Freyr could mean Lord, okay, from the Proto-Germanic Frauan, meaning ruler. Okay, so that's the first option. The second is the generative one, from Freyia, meaning fruitful or flourishing or generative, okay? And the etymology of his name has been linked to the Tocharian enque, which means man, and the Latin inguin, which means groin. But he's also known as Ing or Ingvi, okay? He's called Ingvi Freyr. That's where we know the association between Ing and Freyr is from, which means Lord Freyr, basically, in the Ynglinga saga, or Lord Ingvi, actually. He's also called Ingunar Freyr in Lokasena, okay? So there's association with Ing and Freyr, so Lord Ing. And then you've also got worshippers of Freyr who have names like Ingjold or Ingimund, okay? So again, it's all this association with Ing and Freyr being the same being, okay? Freyr himself is not actually mentioned in Anglo-Saxon England, but he does appear as Ing. For example, in the Old English rune poem, there's other things like the Old English poem Exodus, which calls the Egyptians Ingefolk, Ingemen, Ingehir, and Ingetheod. Ing's folk, Ing's men, Ing's army, Ing's nation. Basically saying that they're pagans is what is associated. So the very idea of worshipping Ing, being associated with Ing, is being a pagan. Okay, so that's a lot of where his name comes from. There's also a closely associated Old English word, Freya, which means Lord, but that's usually only used in Christian context. It's not used in pagan context. Now, Freyr is one of the Vanir, okay? So he's one of the tribe of gods who are the Vanir that we talked about before. The idea, obviously, was that there are the Azir and the Vanir are the two tribes of gods, and even the Jotnar, to an extent, the tribes of gods. The Vanir may be associated with the Alfar, and he himself, Freyr, is the ruler of Alfheim. He's given the Alfheim, the land of the elves, as a tooth present, basically. He is one of the hostages that are exchanged when the war between the Azir and the Vanir ends. So there's a war, basically, way back in time between the Azir gods and the Vanir gods, or tribes, and as part of the peace, Njord, Freyr, and Freya come to live with the Azir. Okay. His sister is Freya. His father is Njord. And he's in love with the giantess called Gertha. He is really important in Sweden. Less so in many other countries, but in Sweden, he's particularly seen as important. Okay. And the royal family Sweden trace their lineages back to him, or did at that point. Many place names in Sweden often contain forms of the name Freyr, so he may well have been the chief god in Sweden. And his cult probably did start there in Sweden, but then Heimskringla mentions that it then spreads from Sweden to Norway, when images of him were taken there, and then in Norway you've got farms and rocks and fields that are being named after Freyr. And then the followers in Norway then go off to Iceland, and so some followers mentioned in the sagas are said to be followers of Freyr, but there's not really that much in the way of place names, so he probably wasn't actually very popular in Iceland. Just some of the people were named after him, and there are stories of his followers going and building temples actually in Iceland, like what about England, for instance. He's also thought to have been very important to the Goths. So the Pietroaska circlet it may say, okay, not definite, but it may say, holy to Ingwe of the Goths. Okay, so again, we've got him called Ingwe here. Okay, and he's often called God of this world, i.e., the God of the here and the now, this age. Okay, so yeah, that's Freyr. He goes on. So he has there's a debate basically about where he fits in and where he comes from. Okay, so I'm going to read this from Wagner. It says, since the 1990s, scholars have been carrying on a similar debate about how best to understand Freyr himself. Is he primarily a god of kingship who provides prosperity and abundance as one of his royal functions? Or is he first and foremost a god of fertility who became associated with rulership because ensuring good harvests was part of the ruler's job? The tide is currently running in favor of the kingship model. Okay, so the first model, not the second. So ancient kings basically were thought to have lots of luck. Okay, they were possibly married to the land, and the land is personified as a goddess. And they're often seen as the mediators between the people and the gods. They're the ones who do the sacrificial rites on behalf of the community. They're the representative of the community to the gods, which gives them a lot of power. But on the other hand, if things go wrong, if there's bad harvest or plague, then they're thought to have actually angered the gods, or they've lost their luck. And so often they end up being sacrificed themselves as an attempt to resolve the situation. So it's a double-edged sword here, really. And Snorri himself, he portrays Freyr, remember this is a Christian mind, saying that Freyr is a human king whose reign was characterized by peace and plenty. Okay. Now, the academic Sundqvist, he says that the story of Freyr and Gerd in Skirnismal may show the importance of a king being married to his land in order to make it fertile. Okay, so this is the sort of sacred marriage between the king and the goddess of the land, brings the fertility and the prosperity and the harvests and the peace and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so let's look at this in a bit more detail, the kingship bit in particular. So in early Skaldic poetry, kennings linked Freyr with fertility. In early Skaldic poetry, kennings linking Freyr with fertility are absent. Instead, the emphasis is on his warriorship and rulership. Okay, so he's not seen necessarily as this god of fertility early on. He's more this great king and ruler and warrior. He is associated as an ancestor of many heathen peoples, and particularly the founder of many royal genealogies, especially in Sweden. But that's not all. Okay, so Tacitus mentions a tribe called these Ingevones, okay, and they include the Angli, who later become the Angles or the English. And Ingevones basically means the friends of Ing, or the people of Ing. And many Anglian kings also have Ingwe, Ingibrand, and Ingwek in their genealogies as names of the founders of their line. So there's this association not only with the people of Sweden, but with the Anglian people, okay, the English. He is seen as like the ancestor of the English tribe. In Flateyjarbók, Freyr is called Sveagod, god of the sphere, which is the tribe that Sweden is named after. So again, this is associating him with the ancestry and the kingship of Sweden. And the royal dynasty of Sweden were the Ynglings. Okay, so again, he's the ancestor, the royal ancestor there. The son of Freyr and Gerd, okay, is Fjolnir, and he is the first, known as the first Yngling king. Okay, the first of the royal dynasty of the Ynglings. Saxo calls the Swedish rulers sons of Fro, which is Freyr, and says some Swedish heroes were kinsmen of the divine Fro. In Gunnar Statterhelmings, Freyr is Blotgudsfia, the sacrifice god of the Swedes. And in Ynglingatal, the poem calls the Yngling brothers Freyr's offspring, and a king of the sphere is called kinsman of Freyr. So we've got very much a strong association between the Swedish and Freyr, and the English and the Ing. Okay, so he's very much the king, the royal ancestor. But that's not all. Okay, he's also associated with the dead and with mounts. So particularly the dead in the mounts, right? So Snorri tells a story of where he's a human king. He dies, he gets buried in this mound, and then people worship him there because his reign was very much about peace and prosperity and stuff. And they believe he can still bring that after death. They open up his mound, they pour in gold and all that sort of stuff. It's also said that he's the one who establishes this custom of burying kings in mounds. Okay, so you've got, like we talked about, Odin with the establishing cremation for dead bodies. He's very much associated with establishing the burials, okay, in mounds. He's the ruler of Alfheim, which is where the elves live. And the Alfa, as we said, are probably the mighty dead, the sort of noble dead, and they're often associated with mounds as well. So again, he's associated with the elves and the mounds that way. And he has a ship called Skidbladnir, which could be used for funerals. So again, this is linking him with death, okay, and the dead and the mounds. But he's not just that. He's many other things as well. So he's associated with war, just like most of the other gods. Okay, so he is called battle skilled and leader of armies. Warriors can be called battle Freyr, and Freyr's game is a kenning for battle, so a poetic name for battle. Okay, Freyr's horse is called Bloody Hooved. He, in the Ragnarok, he fights against this giant called Beli, and he kills him with an antler. He's associated with boars, and he has a special one called Gullingbursti. And boars actually often appear on helmets, especially if you look at like the Sutton Hoo helmet and other Anglo-Saxon ones, which in Beowulf is said to be for protection. Okay, so he's very much this protector, this war god, this battle god, this leader of armies. So again, associating more with the kingship role, because the king would have been the leader of the battles, and he would have been a warrior. Things. Horses is associated with him as well. So horses were a symbol of kings, of nobility and warriors. Okay, horse meat had to be eaten by the king in certain rituals, like in Yule. Okay, and as we said, so Freyr is closely associated with horses. For example, horses sacred to him were kept in or near his temples and sanctuaries. For example, at Thrandheim, Hrafnau, he's a follower of Freyr, and he kept this horse called Freyfaxi. And in Vatnsdale saga, there's another horse called Freyfaxi as well. So Freyr is repeatedly associated with horses, okay, which again is this symbol of nobility, of kings, of warriors, that sort of thing, okay. But he's also associated with peace, and this is probably, if you're king, you have to have good harvests, but you also have to bring peace, okay? So Adam of Bremen says Freyr bestows peace and pleasure on mortals, okay? He is called on for peace, in fact. So it says in Gylfaginning, it is good to invoke him for peace. In the saga of Hakon the Good, there are toasts drunk to Freyr, again, for peace. in Vigaglum Saga, weapons and outlaws are forbidden in places that are sacred to Freyr, sorry. And Freyr gets angry when Glum sheds blood in his holy field. So although he is a warrior, he's very much more about peace. Okay, and weapons are just not allowed in those sacred places. So this is a taboo that you could also follow in your rituals. Never bring weapons anywhere near any sacred places, particularly if you're honouring Freyr. He will get angry. And in Vatna's Dela Saga, again, weapons are banned from a temple to Freyr. So it may be that some gods are okay with weapons, but Freyr certainly is not. Okay, he's much more about peace, despite the fact that he's also a warrior. So he's also a god or a god who's interested in oaths, marriage, and pleasure. We've already seen how Thor, Odin, Tiw, and Frigg are all about oaths, and marriage in particular for Frigg. So Ing and Freyr, or he's also associated with these things. So, for instance, he's called on to uphold oaths. So there's a tale that when it came to Yule Eve, people would bring this Yule boar in, this special Yule boar, and they'd swear oaths on it. Like it's probably where these New Year's resolutions come from. They swear these oaths on this boar, and the oaths, they're basically, the boar is associated with Freyr. Okay, so he's associated here with oaths. In the Icelandic law code, Freyr is one of the 3 gods that's invoked in an oath sworn on rings that's kept in temples. So the oath ring that's kept in a temple, if you swear an oath on it, you swear it to 3 gods, Freyr being one of those gods. He's invoked at marriages. Okay, so Adam of Bremen says, a libation is poured if marriages are to be celebrated to Friko. Friko is another way of saying Freyr. Okay, he's particularly linked to fertility and to pleasure as he has a large phallus. Okay, so that's about the sort of pleasure side of things. And Adam of Bremen says worship of Friko and Freyr, Apsula, who bestows peace and pleasure on mortals. His likeness too they fashion with an immense phallus. And small statues of him, like the one in the top right, you can see they are versions of him with a large phallus. And as we said before, the etymology of his name has been linked to the Latin inguin, which means groin. Okay. So we've talked about the war, we've talked about peace and plenty. Now we're going to talk about harvest. Okay. So in modern days, he's very much associated with the harvest, but he was also associated with the harvest a long time ago, just like Thor was. Okay. But this is probably more in the in Sweden, in particular. So Old Norse has this thing saying "Ar och fruther," so this saying "Ar och fruther," which means good harvest and peace, and it's often used and associated with Freyr in particular. Okay, and Snorri says this. He says he was called the Lord of the Swedes. In his days, the peace of Frodi began. There were also good harvests throughout all the lands. The Swedes attributed that to Freyr. He was all the more honoured than other gods because in his days the people of the land were richer than before thanks to peace and good harvests. So that's what a king was expected to bring to his land, is peace and good harvest. Freyr did that, and therefore he's honoured as this god after he dies. Well, according to Snorri anyway. Gylfaginning says Freyr is the most splendid of the gods. He controls the rain and the shining of the sun, and through them the bounty of the earth. It is good to invoke him for peace and abundance. He also determines men's success in prosperity. So here we have him associated not just with harvest, but with the weather, with peace and abundance, and with prosperity, okay? And the bounty of the earth. The saga of Hakon the Good mentions in a feast, toasts were drunk to Freyr among other gods for peace and a good harvest. Okay. He is one of the Vanir gods, and they are very much gods of the earth, gods of prosperity, gods of fertility, of magic, those sorts of things. Okay. He has 2 servants, Vigvir, which means barley, and Bela. And the Old English Beo, which comes from these, also means barley. Okay. So Freyr is very much associated with the harvest that way as well. He has a wagon, okay, in which he's taken round during autumn to bless the land. This is very similar to what Tacitus says happens with Nerthus. She's like the Earth Mother, and she's taken round the land to bless the land and to bring peace. And again, you're not allowed to have weapons and stuff when she's around. He also has a ship, which could potentially be used for the same thing, as it travels over land as well as sea. Okay, so the ship associates him with harvest as well, of the sea, this time sea harvest. And the Old English rune poem talks about Ing going over the sea on a ship. So it's not just a wagon, it's also a ship that he could have. And there's an Old English rune poem that also mentions his wagon or his ship. In Iceland, winter nights is a sacrifice to Freyr usually. Okay, and winter nights is the celebration of the beginning of winter, but also the end of the harvest. It's a harvest celebration. Okay, there are also Swedish annual sacrifices to Freyr, or there were, called the Froblot. Okay, the sacrifice to Freyr. There's a Danish king called Frodi, and his name means wise or fruitful or luxurious, and he may be associated with Freyr. Okay, and he himself was also carried around the land when he died. So he's sort of like a real life king that takes on a lot of the attributes of Freyr, basically. And as we've also seen, his name has links to fruitfulness. So his name may come from that word fryoia, which means fruitful or flourishing or generative, as we said. Okay, so harvest and plenty and fruitfulness and abundance and harvests and barley and all these things are associated with him. Okay, so that's Freyr. Now he has a sister, and his sister is Freya. Okay, and she's become quite popular in modern heathenry. So let's have a talk about who she is. Okay, so the first thing to note is she's only really attested among the Scandinavians. You don't find her in the Anglo-Saxons. You don't find her in the continental Germans. Okay, that said, it's possible that she is a cognate of some other god that you would find in these other places. Okay, and we'll explore that in a minute. There are many places in Scandinavia named after her, which shows her popularity. And it's possible that she may be their dawn goddess, because the Norse don't seem to have a dawn goddess, but it's one of the few Indo-European cultures that doesn't have this. And because her name basically means lady, it could be covering up for another name that may mean that she was a dawn goddess. And she has some attributes that are similar to dawn goddesses in other cultures. She's married to Other, which means fury. Now, this may be Odin, and Sulafata says that Freya is Odin's concubine, but it may be, Other may be someone different. She's the daughter of Njord and the twin brother of Freyr. And she has various names. They include Giffen, which means giver, Mardel, which means bright sea brightness, Seer, which means sow or boar, Horn, which means flax, and possibly also the goddesses Gul, or the people Gulvig and Heider, which is names basically for Seidr workers, may also be her as well. And Alfric says she is a daughter of Thor. Okay. She's associated with prosperity. Okay, but she's a Vanir god after all. She is in fact the goddess of the Vanir, and Vanadis is one of her names, which means High Lady of the Vanir. She has two daughters, Knos and Gersemi, and those names mean treasure, okay, which associates her with prosperity. And the Vanir are these gods of wealth, of prosperity, of land, of fertility, etc. She has this special necklace, Brisingamon, okay, and she's also often associated with gold and with fire. And gold, in fact, is also called fire, and her tears are said to be gold. Okay, so all of these things associate her with prosperity, so that's things she can bring. She is the mead giver. Okay, she may be, so basically Freya may be the same as Gulveig, And vague is a synonym for mead, which is often said to be bright or shining, like Hyder. Hyder's throng, Hyder's wave is a known kenning for mead. Okay. Freya also offers mead to Ottar, okay, so he can remember what she taught him. That's in Hyndluljoth, while she gives Hedin mead to get him to cause battle in Sorlathatar. So she uses mead. She gives mead to people, and she uses them to get them to do things that she wants. Okay. She is, like Frigg, a lover, associated with love and sexuality. Snorri says, Freya is the most splendid of the goddesses. She has a home in heaven called Folkvanger, warriors' fields. Okay, so this associates her with battle. Wherever she rides into battle, half of the slain belong to her. When she travels, she drives a chariot drawn by 2 cats. Then, she is easily approachable for people who want to pray to her. So like Thor, she's another one that you could choose to pray to sort of really start your heathen journey and to worship, okay? She delights in love songs and it is good to call on her in matters of love. Okay, so she's very much associated with love here, but there's also battle and some other things as well. Loki accuses her of promiscuity, as does Hyndla, okay, in the lore. In fact, Loki claims she slept with her brother, Freyr, as well as with many gods and even elves as well. And many Jotuns want to marry her in the myths. Okay, so she's probably very beautiful, according to the myths. She takes mortal lovers as well, and in Hyndluljoth, she transforms her lover into a boar. Okay, she sleeps with 4 dwarves to get the Brisingamen necklace, and it's said that she likes love or erotic songs, which are called mansonger. Okay, so which are sort of erotic songs basically. So she's very much a goddess of love as well. But she's also a mistress of magic, just like most of the gods were. She teaches Odin Seidr. She may be the person of Kolvig or Hyder, which are seeresses or Seidr workers in the lore. She can do journeying and shape-shifting, and she has this falcon shape, so she can take on a bird form and fly. Okay. Snorri says she was a priest of the Vanir, priestess of the Vanir. And Vanir are very much associated with magic, along with their fertility and land and earth and all that sort of stuff. And she travels on a wagon drawn by cats. Now, this is interesting because Volvas, the ones who practice Seidr, wore cat fur gloves, as you can see in Eric the Red saga. And cats are also often associated with magic. So this again associates her with magic. Like Frigg, she can be an aid in childbirth. Okay, so she's called on in childbirth along with Frigg, according to Udrunner Grutter, and she is also a patroness of childbirth. So it may not be that you go to Frigg, you may go to Freyr. Okay, and that's one of the reasons you might want to worship a god and a goddess, maybe, is that the goddess can help with, particularly if you're a woman, with calling on for things in childbirth and stuff like that. Okay. She's also a warrior, just like pretty much most of the other gods. She's associated with death. She gets the first half of the slain. She gets to choose which half she wants. Okay. When warriors die. So before Odin gets to take anybody to Valhalla, she chooses the first half. In Aegos saga, there's a woman called Thorgerd who starves herself and says, I shall take no food until I sup with Freya, which suggests that you can go and be with her, okay? She incites strife, though, okay? So with Thorlasatter, she stirs up strife between 2 kings, okay? So she causes war, basically. And if she's Golvig, then she possibly caused the Azir-Vanir war, okay? Because she was probably basically the Azir burned Golvig 3 times and she keeps coming back to life. And that causes the Vanir and Azir to go to war. She lives in a hall called Folkvanger, which means army plain, okay, or plain of soldiers and things like that. So again, she's associated with war. And in Linga saga, Snorri suggests that she will survive after the other gods die in Ragnarok. Okay. So that's Freya. Okay. Now we're going to talk about Mother Earth. Okay. Now she's called many different names in different places. You've got Jord in the Scandinavian area and Fjorgyn. Okay. And you've got Nerthus in the continental Germanic areas, and you've got Folda and Urcha in the Anglo-Saxon areas. Now, these may all be the same being. They may be particular goddesses of particular areas of land, but they are very much the Earth Mother being, okay? And she was an important part of ancient heathen culture. So often the Earth Mother is seen as a female figure who brings forth life and is partnered with the sky god. So whether that's Tyr or whether that's Tyr, Odin, or Thor. Okay. Sigdrifamal has a prayer that we've looked at. And it says, "Hail to the mighty fecund earth." Okay. So they're hailing, as part of this prayer, the earth. In Anglo-Saxons, Akobot, which is the field remedy charm, says, "Urcha, Urcha, Urcha, Earth Mother." Okay. And "Hail to you, Earth, Folda, Mother of Men." Okay. And then there's a 6th century English herb gathering prayer, preserved in an 11th century version, which says, "Holy Goddess Earth, who brings forth nature, you are called Mother of the Gods. You are Queen of the Gods. O Goddess, you I adore as divine." Okay, so this shows that there is worship going on of the earth, okay, and the earth goddess in particular, the Earth Mother. Now, Jord, she's the Norse goddess, and her name means earth. Okay, and she's seen as the mother of Thor through Odin and the daughter of Night. Okay, so Night has a daughter, Jord, and Jord marries Odin, or sleeps with Odin, definitely anyway, and then they produce Thor. So that's Jord, the Earth Mother in Scandinavia. In Germania, Tacitus says they all worship Nerthus, or Mother Earth. Now, this is referring to a particular group of tribes which include the Angli, which is where the English come from. Now, Nerthus is also cognate with the Norse Njord, okay? Both their names are cognate. So, and he's the god of seafaring. So it may be that there are two aspects of the same deity, okay? Or a pair of siblings or lovers. For instance, Loki accuses Njord of fathering Frey and Freya with his sister. So it may be that Nerthus and Njord are brother and sister, okay? Or are lovers. Or they are one deity that has two sides to them, okay? It's not really clear. A lot of that's conjecture and speculation, okay? But definitely the name is cognate with Njord. She is drawn around in wagons by cows, okay? And cows, again, are associated with Mother Earth in a lot of places. There is rejoicing and a holiday. No war is allowed, just like with Freyr. She goes back to the island where she is washed by slaves, and then the slaves are killed, okay? And that's basically what Tacitus says about her in Germania, about Nerthus. She's drawn around in a wagon, and drawing someone around in a wagon, or in ships, in fact, is common for the Vanir. Okay, so she's very much more of a Vanir type goddess. Now, it may be that she is the earth itself, or it may be that she is a local goddess who brings blessings to the earth, like what the Celts had. The Celts, they very much had lady sovereignties, like a goddess of sovereignty, okay, who's a local goddess, not the actual full earth itself, okay. She's the personification of the land, but it may be that she is actually the earth itself, okay. You'll have to decide how you're going to see that. Other potential goddesses of earth from the myths include Sif, Gerd, Skadi, Gefjon, Fjorgyn, Zisa, Folda, Frau Herka. Okay, so there are lots and lots of goddesses who are associated with the earth and with the land. Sometimes they're more localized or about particular aspects of the earth. Like you've got Sif, and is more agricultural goddess. Gerd is more of the garden goddess. Skadi is more associated with the mountains and the land, that sort of thing. Now, Fjorgyn, the female bit, may be related to Fjorgyn, who is the father of Frigg. Okay, and some suggest that Frigg herself is the earth goddess, and Thor is called Fjorgyn's or Jord's son, I'd say. So it may be that Fjorgyn and Frigg, or the Earth Mother and Frigg, are the same. I mean, it's a bit of, well, it's speculation, basically, but it is possible to see them in that way. Okay. The gods often seem to marry a goddess who represents the earth or its fertility in some way. Okay, just as you see that the king who had to marry the goddess of the land to bring fertility and harvest. So the same thing happens with the gods. It's a sacred marriage, which then brings the fertility to the land. And there's many examples of goddesses of the land and earth who are associated with both land and water. Okay, so you've got first Nerthus, who lives on an island, who is washed in the water around that island. So she's the goddess not only of the island, but also the water around it and the land around it. Okay, and then you've got Gefjon, who is a goddess of Zealand, and she is almost an agricultural goddess who she's promised she can have whatever land she can carve out with a plough in one day. So she basically carves out the whole of the Zealand island with agricultural ploughs and stuff in one day. So she's associated not just with the land, but also the sea around that and the island. The Earth Goddess is less addressed in Scandinavian texts. Okay, you don't really see her, other than the odd one or two occasions. You don't really see her addressed very much. But in the Anglo-Saxon text, we see her a lot more. Okay, so it seems to be certainly more important with the Anglo-Saxons. We need to remember as well that the Earth is said to be formed from Ymir's body. Okay, not so. Is it a goddess? Is it Ymir's body? You decide how you see that. And as we said, the king or the chief of a tribe is often seen as responsible for the fertility of the land and is married to the land goddess, just like the gods seem to be as well. Okay. Now let's talk about Eostre. So Eostre is only found actually in the Anglo-Saxons, and we only really have a very little bit of evidence for her. So the main bit of evidence comes from Bede, and he writes in De Temporum Rationale, The Reckoning of Time, that Eostre month, or month, has a name which is now translated Paschal month, and which was once called after a goddess of theirs named Eostre, in whose honour feasts were celebrated in that month. Now they designated the Paschal season by her name, calling the joys of the new rite by the time-honoured name of the old observance. So what he's saying there is that the Anglo-Saxon heathens, they used to have this goddess called Eostre, who was worshipped in April, or Eostre month, and nowadays Paschal, which is the Christian celebration of Easter, they designated the Easter season, the Paschal season, by this old goddess's name, Eostre. That's basically what he's saying there. And this is the only direct attestation we have of her name. Okay, some people think that because of that, she was just invented by Bede. But you've got to ask yourself, why would a churchman be so interested in creating this new goddess name? It seems a little bit suspect, really, that he would do something like that. So she probably was a real goddess. Okay, but have a look at the evidence, make your own mind up on that. Now, there's a book been written called The Germanic Goddesses in the Pagan World by Schull, and he says that maybe she's a localized goddess of an eastern tribe in Kent because her name is associated very much with the word for east. Okay, and Grimm, who's a sort of 19th century guy, he talks about Ostara, and he speculates that this word Ostara, from the Frankish month Ostar Manoth, is actually comes to the same root as Eostre came from. Okay, and And the current German name actually for Easter is Ostern. So he sort of traces it back and says that that's where it may have come from. A lot of people don't agree with him on that. They think he made this idea of a star up, because he's the only one who really talks about it. Now, there are personal names as well. For instance, in Anglo-Saxon, like Eostowina, friend of Eostra, that's what it means. You have place names like Eastry in Kent, Eastrington in Yorkshire, Eastria in Cambridgeshire. Now, they could be a reference to Eostra, or they could just mean east as well. So it's not clear on that. But something that gives more weight to the idea that she was, this is a name of a goddess who was real, is the Austria Henne, okay, which are, we talked about the mothers, the matronae, the modru. Now, one of the biggest group of inscriptions from the Roman era to them are to the Austria Henne, okay, these mothers of the Eastern peoples, or the East. There's 150 inscriptions we found of them. So that gives a lot of credence to it. Also, the name, her name Eostra, is etymologically from the Indo-Europeans, os, which means to shine, or brightness, or dawn, or east, or rising sun. And what's interesting is that many dawn goddesses appear in other Indo-European cultures, and they are also cognate with Eostra. So you've got the Roman Aurora, Greek Eos, the Lithuanian Osrim, the Latvian Oskelis, the Persian Usha, the Sanskrit Ushas. All of these names are dawn goddesses, and they are all cognate with Eostra, which suggests that actually Eostra may well be an Anglo-Saxon goddess. Okay, it may not have been made up. There is a possibility that Freya, as I said before, is the Norse equivalent of Eostra, or perhaps Iduna. Okay, because the Scandinavians don't have a dawn goddess, and because Freya has some associations that other dawn goddesses have, it may be that Freya is a dawn goddess. We don't know for sure. It's just speculation. Equally, there may be she may just be a tribal goddess of an Eastern people, and it's the East part that maybe creates her name. But because of the Proto-Indo-European evidence about dawn goddesses, it suggests that really there's something more. Okay, so she is a goddess of dawn, you know that. Possibly spring, although as when we talk about the season festivals, April is actually seen as the start of the summer half of the year. So she's more maybe the goddess of the dawn and of the summer. And also the goddess of the returning light. Okay. Now, in other Indo-European cultures, the dawn goddess is a relative of the sun. She is associated with the morning star. She rides a chariot. She's young and beautiful and sensual and interested in love affairs, but also has a warlike aspect. Okay. So although we don't see any of this stuff to do with Eostra, because we just don't have much information about Eostra, you could actually see, you could take these other ideas from other dawn goddesses and say, well, that's what Eostra is probably like. Okay. It's also, interestingly, some of these things are similar to what Freya is like. Okay, and that's where they get the possibility that Freya and Eostra may be similar dawn goddesses. Okay, so that's Eostra. Okay, I'm going to stop the video here. Okay, we've now gone through the 8 main gods and goddesses that I wanted to cover. And we'll do in the last video, we're going to talk about how you can actually connect with the gods, okay, and the different ways of doing that.